carina. Vabbè. Non la prendo.
Allora, ci siamo tutti. Massimo. Allora, buongiorno a tutti, è una bellissima giornata, sarebbe bello stare in giardino a fare due chiacchiere, ma il programma prevede questa seconda tappa e grazie di essere qui in un momento anche molto frenetico, perché la Biennale, le mostre, ci sono 1000 iniziative che si aprono, quindi siamo contenti che ci sia questo gruppo di eroici che sono qui per partecipare all'inizio di questa edizione 34esima del Premio Scarpa. Io non sapete che abbiamo avuto ieri la presentazione di un libro con il quale abbiamo festeggiato le edizioni precedenti, ben 33, e quindi ieri ho già parlato abbastanza e faccio solo un saluto di carattere istituzionale come referente del comitato scientifico, che ha la responsabilità, come ogni anno, di scegliere un luogo, di portare avanti questo progetto, e come anche direttore della Fondazione Benetton. Il premio è il risultato di un viaggio, oltre che di una lunga ricerca, di un'esplorazione, e tutti ovviamente sono sempre curiosi, soprattutto gli amici inglesi, scozzesi, ma dove siete stati, che cosa è successo, ma perché questo non altro. E oggi diciamo è il momento nel quale abbiamo la possibilità di capire le ragioni di questa scelta, che apparentemente sono anche un po' ambigue, no? Perché nel viaggio in Scozia abbiamo visto dei giardini straordinari, dei giardini d'autore, dei paesaggi storici molto interessanti, abbiamo conosciuto realtà dal punto di vista delle heritage, per esempio, importantissime, e poi invece ci siamo fermati su qualcosa dove avevamo, piuttosto che delle certificati di autorialità e qualità, avevamo già un indizio, il nome Hospitalfield, e quindi l'inizio di un filone tematico che in questa edizione, sapete che ogni anno il premio intercetta, attraverso lo studio di un luogo e l'incontro con le persone che rappresentano il senso di questo luogo, ogni anno intercetta un punto di vista sulla ricerca nel paesaggio, un punto di vista sull'esplorazione anche di questa parola giardino che è contenuta nella titolazione. Quindi il mio saluto si ferma qui, ricordandovi questa sorta di piccolo indizio che ci ha poi, attraverso le reti amicali e poi attraverso la vera e propria ricerca, ci ha fatto entrare in un mondo che non è molto di più di quello che vedete da questa immagine, no? Che è così piena di appeal, di riferimento a una certa estetica del giardino, del patrimonio, no? È molto molto di più, perché appunto è un luogo che rappresenta il senso dell'accoglienza, e in questo momento questa declinazione dal punto di vista della ricerca del paesaggio, ma soprattutto dal punto di vista delle contraddizioni e delle inquietudini che caratterizzano la nostra necessità di capire sia il paesaggio che il nostro rapporto anche con la natura, il nostro essere natura, è fondamentale. Quindi siamo entrati in modo molto ascetico, come ci hanno insegnato gli amici scozzesi, in questo mondo, e da qui è nata una ricerca e tutto quello che vedrete poi nell'arco di questa giornata. Quindi questo è il mio saluto. E l'ultima cosa che vorrei anche ripetere, non mi stancherò di ripetere, in realtà questa scelta rappresenta un dovere dal punto di vista di un centro studi che ha un respiro internazionale, però rappresenta anche una nostra necessità interna, quella di non stancarsi di ricordarsi che cos'è la Fondazione Benetton. È un luogo di accoglienza. Siete qui, penso che lo capiate, e questo è il nostro lavorare con gli amici di Hospitalfield. Non è solo partenariato, collaborazione, multidisciplinarietà, è il nostro desiderio di proiettarci nel futuro. E quindi grazie in primis agli amici scozzesi che ci aiutano a continuare questo lavoro. Allora, come sapete, io e Patrizia Boschiero siamo curatori e coordiniamo questo progetto e ci dividiamo il lavoro, e io per ora mi sono limitato ai saluti, e iniziamo con l'invito dei relatori di questa mattinata, e passo la parola a Patrizia per una breve descrizione dei profili delle persone che parleranno.
Desidero anch'io ringraziare tutti voi, e in particolare il pubblico e il nostro comitato scientifico che lavora con noi a questo progetto, gli ospiti che sono arrivati da Edimburgo, da Londra, e che hanno lavorato intensamente con noi in questi mesi per far sì che potessimo realizzare questo libro dedicato a Hospitalfield, a cui teniamo molto, e per realizzare il film documentario di cui ci parlerà alla fine della mattinata il regista Davide Gambino, e che vedremo tutti insieme oggi pomeriggio a Sant'Eonisto per la cerimonia del premio. E prima di invitare la prima relatrice della mattina, consentitemi anche, perché desidero farlo, ringraziare di cuore tutti i colleghi e le colleghe di questa fondazione, perché per realizzare progetti come le giornate di studio e come il Premio Carlo Scarpa è fondamentale il contributo di tutti, dalla segreteria organizzativa alla biblioteca per le acquisizioni di tutti i volumi che adesso sono a disposizione di tutti in merito al paesaggio scozzese e a Hospitalfield e alle varie ricerche collegate. I tecnici, in particolare stamattina vorrei ringraziare Lucio Montagnier che segue sempre la regia di questi incontri pubblici in auditorium e non soltanto, e un grazie sentito anche al lavoro delle interpreti che rendono possibile questi incontri. Ieri ho dimenticato di ringraziarle, lo faccio oggi. E le colleghe dell'ufficio stampa, dell'ufficio comunicazione, insomma, non posso fare un elenco di 20 nomi, ma ci tengo molto a ringraziare tutti, a partire naturalmente anche da chi ha lavorato insieme a me e a Luigi Latini a questo libro, e quindi l'ufficio editoriale della fondazione. E ricordo anche, do queste informazioni adesso perché poi magari si rischia di non darle più, che abbiamo anche un bookshop in fondazione per cui sono disponibili tutti i nostri lavori sul paesaggio, a partire naturalmente dal volume collettivo dedicato a Hospitalfield in italiano e in inglese, e il volume che abbiamo presentato ieri, Topofilia, dedicato in generale al Premio Carlo Scarpa, anche questo pubblicato in italiano e in inglese. Mi sembra doveroso ricordare anche che questi volumi escono in coedizione con Edizioni Antiga, che è lo stampatore e distributore, per cui sono libri che si possono trovare in libreria tramite le piattaforme online, eccetera. Non voglio fare troppa pubblicità, però insomma quando escono dei libri è bello anche dire che poi circolano, così come faremo del nostro meglio per far circolare il più possibile, in occasioni legate al mondo dell'università, ad associazioni e quant'altro, anche il film documentario, che è una componente molto significativa del lavoro che dedichiamo ai luoghi premiati. E adesso con grandissimo piacere e anche con un po' di emozione vorrei introdurre e chiamare qui con noi Lucy Byatt, direttrice di Hospitalfield dal 2012, che abbiamo felicemente conosciuto durante il viaggio di studio di maggio di un anno fa, e abbiamo dedicato qualche ora alla visita di questo luogo straordinario che è Hospitalfield, e quindi siamo felici di averla qui con noi, e sarà il primo intervento della mattinata, dove naturalmente da par suo, che insomma governa in modo che lei stessa dichiara, spero non troppo visibile, però tutte le dinamiche e la vita complessa di questo luogo, che è una residenza artistica ma è molto altro, e che devo dire in questi mesi ci ha aiutato in modo molto significativo per la costruzione del libro, del film, della conoscenza delle figure che era bene coinvolgere in questo lavoro. Hospitalfield, Lucy Byatt, scusate, si occupa da sempre di arte contemporanea, è a Hospitalfield dal 2012, precedentemente è stata responsabile di diversi programmi nazionali legati all'arte contemporanea, ha guidato diversi istituti, in particolare a Bristol, Spike Island per molti anni, organizzando, come dire, spazi di vita e di restituzione pubblica per l'arte contemporanea. E a Hospitalfield, come dire, è la regista di tutta una serie di situazioni estremamente vive e interessanti in relazione anche alla comunità. La sua formazione è di carattere artistico al Politecnico di Brighton e alla Glasgow School Art, e una sua specifica attenzione, mi pare di poter dire, è dedicata proprio allo sviluppo di modelli organizzativi per e con gli artisti, in modo da, come dire, sviluppare le possibilità più adatte al lavoro degli artisti e al loro tempo creativo. Vi passo la parola a Lucy Byatt. Grazie.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to understand a little bit how to operate this. How do I do this? Okay. First thing. So, hello, and thank you for having us all here. And it's an extraordinary thing to have a gathering of folk visit us, for me to perform my organisation, and then a few weeks later to be awarded this amazing prize. So that is, it's been a very exciting, and just getting our thoughts around that. So today, trying to explain what is Hospitalfield, this 19th century house that sits on the 12th, 13th century site of an old hostel that was built for the Abbey, Arbroath Abbey, which is in the heart of the town. At the time, this was a site that was quite far away from the centre of the town. And over time, that town has come out to meet us. And there was a moment where one of my board members, a long time ago, said, "Oh, you must plant some trees to hide all those houses." And I said, no, they're our audience. They're our people. We need them. And so we can see them and we love them. And sometimes they knock the walls down. Their children do things like that. But nevertheless, we love our audiences and the people that come and visit us. So this image here is a photograph of Patrick in the very early period where he was trying to ingratiate himself with Elizabeth, staring lovingly into the eyes of her dog. And we have a lot of dogs at Hospitalfield. This is a very, this 19th century, this Victorian story is a very familial one. It's about a family, really, as well as these grand ideas. And so we try to consider that as a really important value as we move forward. And this photograph, actually, it's quite an important thing, is that over decades, as each person in my role left, they would take with them quite a lot of stuff. They would, and very recently, 2 women came back with enormous carrier bags of material that their grandfather had taken when he left Hospitalfield. He didn't mean to steal, he meant to save, because Hospitalfield has always had this uncertain future. And So returning this material and finding really a plethora of very important information, archival information, including this photograph, early photograph, is amazingly important to us. So here is Patrick's. I'm going to read a little bit here. Hospitalfield, established in the mid-19th century, was the radical inspiration of what we really consider. Patrick was this amazingly charming person, but he was an ordinary artist. He was amongst much more interesting artists than himself. But where he was not ordinary, it was in his ideas that he brought to Hospitalfield when he married Elizabeth. Alan Fraser was concerned with the loss of the handmaid. He was not against modernity. He was simply observing the impact of early capitalism on working people. He was not intentionally nostalgic. He was observing the way in which the arts could offer opportunity that could, as it had for him, enable social mobility. His priority was, in the context of so many new forms of mechanization, to protect the freedom and authorship of the artist. Hospitalfield was his legacy. Behind him, he pictured, would be many generations of artists, craftspeople who would be supported through his creation, his bequest. Supporting artists and investing in new generations of artists is just as urgent now as it was perceived to be in the mid-19th century. It was, however, the less visible support, it is now the less visible support that artists need, a relationship of trust where we offer time and ask for little tangible outcome in return. We trust that artists use this time well. The provision of space for conscious uncertainty and the opportunity to practice and to fail in order, in time, to succeed. This is a slow and quiet work. This is the commitment that we have to creating the context of a scholarly atmosphere tucked behind the heritage programme and the experience that visitors have of visiting the house, grounds, and the very special garden. This is our interpretation for our time of what the trustees at the turn of the last century referred to as the Great Rural Experiment. And this is, for us, a really important moment if you imagine the pulling of all resource into cities, all education, all knowledge, all... And this was Alan Fraser's idea of working against that, of creating a great heritage project, a great benefactory project in a rural setting. And my job now, I feel, is to create a context that is perceived to be and experienced by artists as a valuable opportunity for them in a world where reputation is really important. And the other, to ensure that Hospitalfield is a place that cannot be lost, because I think that uncertainty that I explained at the beginning is the thing that has reduced if you develop an organization in an atmosphere of uncertainty, then you lose so much possibility because nobody can believe in you. And I suppose that idea of leaning into certainty means that we can build around us a lot of stakeholders. Both these things, this support for artists and this idea of creating a really clear picture of the future for Hospitalfield, must be achieved strategically and with stealth. For the latter, we have developed a whole master plan for the investment that others will speak of today. But the part that is less easy to see from a plan is the wealth of people who will rush into those buildings and use them. Visitors, volunteers, young people who've had experience of working with us, all become a vital army of advocacy should Hospitalfield come under question. And I think that Hospitalfield has been protected through the idea of somebody putting their arms around it and holding it to themselves and keeping everybody out. That's the legacy that I inherited. And I have to say that worked. It does work to a certain extent, making it very private, making it extremely far away from everybody else's experience is one way of looking after something. But it's not our way. I think our way is to ensure that in our absence, there is a huge vociferous voice that will go on to protect it well into the future and understand its values. The I just wanted my slides here. I'm going to rattle through some slides. Are really to try and to give a picture of what are. So this is the picture gallery that was Alan Fraser's first project, completed in 1853. It was absolutely his first thing that he decided he wanted to do, to create this great museum-like picture gallery and commission artists to make works for the collection. And he commissioned work from his friends, his London friends, which Francis is going to talk a lot more about later. And then his last room, which was completed after his death, the Cedar Room, which is, I suppose he threw out another room because he needed more space for his collections. And it is really the most astonishingly beautiful room. And the board of trustees, at a point at which Alan Fraser died, said, stop. Got to stop, and the builders continued to build. They did not want to leave it unfinished, and I feel that is the atmosphere that Alan Fraser left behind. He had this great group of advocates who understood his vision, and we are in this extraordinary bubble, this land that still remains around us, and one can glimpse Hospitalfield through all sorts of different spaces at a distance from the site. And we are close to the sea, overlooking the sea. That's a really beautiful site that I think, and this is exactly where the first photograph is taken, below this point. And of course, then we have the legacy of the dog. The dog is everywhere, and we love that. Sort of strange relationship he had. I think they were their children, and so that they needed to create lots of statuary to their children. And then we see these early carvings. These are on the picture gallery, the site of an old barn. So maybe these rather rudimentary, rough old carvings were supposed to sort of respond to the previous use of that site. But then within 50 years, the point of which Alan Fraser built the mortuary chapel, which is a whole nother story, which we've sort of, Patricia has included an image in the book but it really needs another book to really talk about the chapel. But at the point at which Elizabeth died, and he built the chapel for her in her memory in this other extraordinary landscape that's so cared for by the local authority, which is a very unusual thing for us in the UK these days. But look at that, isn't that the most beautiful way of keeping a landscape? But within the chapel, he then commissions these much more sophisticated, these extraordinary crafted interiors, some of which are plain and elegant in this way, and others are incredibly festooned with decoration. So we can see this leap, this long period over which time he worked with these craftspeople, trained them, invested in them, invested in their training. So in 1853, they were making those rudimentary cow's heads on the end of the picture gallery, but by 1873, they were, or 1875 into the late 1870s, they were making these extraordinary carvings for this memorial chapel. And then our turn, what is our contribution going to be? And one of the stories that we can't tell through the house is the story of the monastic story. And so this is the point at which we asked Cruiser St. John to come and work with us on a master plan, and Nigel Dunnett to work on the horticulture, the garden, design of the garden. And we chose Nigel really because he wasn't interested in building things, or we were trying to get him not to be interested in building things. We were really interested in his plantsmanship, because that is what's so extraordinary about him, and the department that he was worked within for so many years at Sheffield, which you'll also hear more about today. So this is what I was left with during COVID, all on my own, this wreckage. And I thought, what on earth? And then by the time we got to the end of the summer, we were all allowed to speak to each other again, 2020. So this is film. Nigel says, I've done all my planting at the edges. This is not true. His one idea that is incredibly important is this central path all the way through the middle of the garden, which you can see on the designs. And this is a really, really great idea, this linking up of the dining room right the way down the center of the garden. And it creates, on the plan, I remember you saying, Peter, I don't know why he's done that, because it looked very odd on the plan, but when you actually experience in the garden from the house, it works really beautifully. And this is Nigel planting. And this is it in full bloom. So this again is a fantastically slow process of everybody trusting this plantsman that he's putting, look, that's a very expensive garden, isn't it? Those thousands of plants. Thank you to all our stakeholders and funders for allowing us this sort of, 12 plants per square meter. And in they go, and then they produce this extraordinary, this is quite an old photograph, so the hedges are high, the views are higher, so, but it's and somebody in the talk said yesterday about how important it is, maintenance goes on and on and on and on, and it does, it truly does, but the reward is immense. Then we'll look at the picturing of the period post Alan Fraser's death. This is a photograph album that was found in England somewhere and sent back to Willie, my predecessor, of a particular artist's experience in Hospitalfield, which is a lovely object to have. Again, another photograph of a group of artists in fancy dress clothing. One of those artists becomes the head of the sculpture in the Royal College. He's the man in the stockings, and probably didn't like to have that photograph taken of himself. But this is when the art school was an undergraduate course for 4 years, residential course. These obviously for men, obviously. And this is the point at which 1938, the postgraduate school, James Cowie was looking at you. James Cowie there. So the daughter of this woman right in the front sent these images to us and said, "This is my mother. Is James Cowie in this photograph?" And yes, sure, he's absolutely right at the centre. And this is wartime. It's when women were beginning to be allowed to be part of the experience. And these are really valuable photographs to have. And this lovely image that was in this batch of the artist using photography, using a mirror, using this reflection, thinking about Cowie's approach to his painting, which one of my curators has written an essay about in the book, which is very nice. And then we have, going into the 60s, this rather staged image, and then here we have the sort of image that we take in these days. So, that nothing ever changes. These images don't, and I see right in the middle, there's Winnie with the specs. I met with her yesterday. I hadn't realized that she was in this photograph. So these are the long relationships that we have with artists who come for 2 weeks, they come for a month, they're focused on their practice while they're with us. And this is still, informally, but still a learning experience. But also a very networked experience, because I don't know if you have this feeling about young people, but we are, when they come to Hospitalfield, they've emerged out of, this is a graduate program, so they've been out of college for not more than 2 years, and the epidemic of loneliness is as present within this generation as it is in older generations that we know about, and they're isolated by the work they have to do. And so coming together creates this enormously important network that they sustain for years into the future. This image in the Cedar Room with a painting of William Calder Marshall, who sculpted all the sculptures on the front of the Royal Academy and was the first chair of Hospitalfield, looking down over these women. So on this sofa is Tamara Henderson, who came and did a residency in 2015, and her work was part of an exhibition that opened the new museum in New York, currently a show that's on. Dineo, who is showing all over the world now. Holly White is an artist that we moved to Glasgow as a result of doing the residency, and who we're closely in touch with. Rahana Zaman, who we are still working with and have just participated in the development of a new film which will open at GI this summer and then go to the Whitechapel in London later in the year. And the work is about the landscape, the labour of the landscape around us in Arbroath. Jamie, Bianca, all these artists that we're really very still in close touch with. This is Tamara, who took up an entire space with, she's also very good at clearing up. And this absolutely amazing work that has been shown around the world of her, around the world. This is a wormery right at the centre of, this is a brilliant landscape project, you should have it here. A wormery right at the centre of the exhibition. The curators have to empty the worm juice onto the garden every day, but you can stand under these arches and hear the sound of the worm's work in going on in the centre of the exhibition space. This is another project at Camden Arts Centre. And this is what she said to me when I said, you know, everything, Hospitalfield inspires me from there on in. And I do remember meeting her in the corridor and saying, you look really miserable, Tamara. This is when she was first doing the residency. She said, I'm in heaven. And I mean, this is my job is to tell you how brilliant Hospitalfield is. But I do think that actually we do create an inspirational, an environment in which artists can work very freely and be very in their work for a period of time. Rahana here in the foreground, a study day that she worked with us on last year in the progress of doing her filming. So here she is. Angus is absolutely a soft fruit. Am I overdoing my time? Oh, sorry. And this is the landscape. So I'll finish very shortly, I promise. This is the landscape, which is a hugely industrialized landscape that we can be very romantic about, but absolutely it is a place of work. And this is a project that Rahana's been working on. I'll skip through some of these to our most recent project with Florence Peake, who was with us in 2024, working with the Scottish Dance Theatre. She'll do a performance later this year at Hospitalfield. But these are long relationships we have with artists before they actually emerge with a project. This is the opening last week of Florence's piece. And I'll come to an end there because I feel the anxiety of time.
Grazie molte a Lucy Byatt per questa rapidissima carrellata sulla vita contemporanea di Hospitalfield e non soltanto. E adesso invece invito qui la professoressa Frances Fowle. Frances Fowle è la presidente del Trust of Hospitalfield, Patrick Alan Fraser Hospitalfield Trust, è una storica dell'arte e siamo molto felici di averla con noi. L'abbiamo conosciuta in questi giorni direttamente, ma c'è anche un suo saggio nel libro che abbiamo pubblicato. Frances Fowle è professoressa emerita di arte del secolo XIX presso l'Università di Edimburgo e per oltre 20 anni è stata curatrice per l'arte francese per le National Galleries of Scotland. Ha curato moltissime mostre internazionali, pubblicato in particolare saggi proprio sull'arte francese e scozzese dell'Ottocento, con una significativa attenzione proprio al tema del collezionismo, al mercato dell'arte e all'identità nazionale e al rinnovamento culturale. Tra le sue pubblicazioni figurano Globalizing Impressionism, The Art Market and the Museum and Scottish Art in the Industrial Age e molte altre. È membro importante di molte istituzioni dedicate proprio all'arte, sia a livello diciamo scozzese che del Regno Unito che internazionale. E ci racconterà Hospitalfield in particolare proprio dal punto di vista della storia dell'arte dell'Ottocento, del ruolo di Patrick Alan Fraser e di questo gruppo di artisti, The Clique. E quindi passo la parola a Frances Fowle. Grazie.
Use this one, yeah? Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right at the back? I'm going to take this off, actually. So I wanted to introduce it to the, or have a more kind of close, in-depth look at some of the collections at Hospitalfield, and also draw attention to the wonderful archive of letters, which we have there. Lucy touched on Patrick Allen Fraser and his incredible vision, and he is really the reason why we're here today. I mean, obviously he is, but also thanks to Lucy, who's the most inspiring director you could possibly imagine, and she's completely transformed Hospitalfield from, as she said, this very inward-looking establishment to the incredibly sort of inclusive, outward-looking establishment, and with wonderful gardens, this incredible setting that we see today. And this vision is very much the vision that Patrick himself had. It was underpinned by socialist ideals and ideas of inclusivity, which were fostered as a very young man in the 1930s in London. So I want to talk about this, the group of artists that he was associated with, and which, through his kind of inspirational patronage, he has perpetuated the memory of. I have to say, many of these artists actually went on to have successful individual careers, but their reputation has been overshadowed by the pre-Raphaelites, unfortunately, with whom they were not particularly, or whom they didn't really approve. I'll just begin with Hospitalfield itself, just to remind you of what a wonderful setting it is. But so the group was led by Richard Dadd, and many of you may have heard of him. He's well known as a Victorian fairy painter. I'll tell you a little bit about him in a minute. And the main artists that formed the kind of core of the clique, you can see here, included William Powell Frith, John Philip, who's known often as John Spanish Philip, Augustus Leopold Egg, Henry Nelson O'Neill, and Patrick himself. So they were brought together by the disillusionment with the Royal Academy, and particularly with the way that they trained artists. In 1837, which was when we would say is beginnings of the clique, the lessons at the Royal Academy consisted of a monthly 2-hour visit from an academician. And this is a quote from Frith. Each professor inculcated his favorite method, often at variance with that of his successor in the following month, the effect being confusion and bewilderment to the student. So they decided that they would set up a separate drawing club. We've just discovered recently a document in the archive, and there are discoveries every day. It's a real kind of treasure trove. That the original name of this club was the New Etching Club. So they drew, and then they had to produce an etching. But they referred to themselves informally as the clique, and this has kind of stuck. So we know from this document that Richard Dadd was appointed as secretary, Augustus Egg was the treasurer. And in addition to these members, you can see here, it also included painters such as Thomas Musgrave Joy, the landscape and marine painter John James Wilson, and later on, the history painter Edward Ward, Alfred Elmore, also another history painter, and the landscape artist Thomas Creswick. So the first meetings were held, which I think you can see, this just gives you an idea of what it was like at the Royal Academy schools in those days. All men, obviously, studying from the nude. And here are the other members of the group. But they all look very austere, and again, all men. The first meeting was held at Dadd's rooms at 66 Great Queen Street in London. And thereafter, they agreed to meet, again, according to this document, once a fortnight at each man's house in rotation. And each member was to produce a sketch illustrating a poem. The first poem they chose was Thomas Gray's Elegy. And then after every third meeting, they would choose an etching. They would select an etching from the sketches that were produced, and then that member would have to produce this etching within a certain length of time. I think they were allowed 6 weeks, and if they didn't produce the etching in that time, they were then fined, and these fines were imposed. It was a very censorious kind of, or very draconian approach. They also spent some evenings drawing portraits of each other, and you can see some examples. Very few have survived, unfortunately. So we've got here Richard Dadd's drawing of Glorious Jock, which was his portrait of John Philip, and then a self-portrait. And then here, this is Dad's portrait of Augustus Egg on the left, and Frith by Henry Nelson O'Neill. So again, these are quite early examples of their work. As well as drawing, they enjoyed socializing. And again, this is a quote from one of the people who attended the meetings. After an hour or two devoted to art, they closed the sitting with a modest repast consisting of bread and cheese and beer. Most of the members of the clique at that time were either history painters, or they enjoyed illustrating scenes from literature, very much as the pre-Raphaelites did in their kind of early days. And but it's interesting to look at an early work by Patrick Allen, as he was known then, because he only became Patrick Allen Fraser after he married. And he was, I mean, this is actually rather a wonderful still life, which I think shows the influence of some of the time he spent in France. You may have looked at the work of Oudry, the French still life painter, but there's always a note of humor to his work. And the same can be said, I think, of this is an early work by Augustus Egg. The title is Queen Elizabeth Discovers She is No Longer Young. So it was always looking for this kind of other angle to his paintings. And he was also, Egg and also Frith and Ward were very influenced by the work of the artist William Hogarth, who produced a whole series of prints, which perhaps you may be familiar with. One of the best known series was A Rake's Progress, which shows this is obviously the rake enjoying himself, engaged in an orgy, but he also shows the penalties of this indulgent lifestyle. And Augustus Egg similarly addressed the same kind of subject with in relation to the life of Buckingham. And you can see the death of Buckingham too, which he loved before and after paintings. So this is Buckingham at his height, enjoying his very indulgent lifestyle. He was George Villiers, second Duke of Buckingham. And these characters would have been very familiar to Victorian audiences, so they would have understood the kind of humour attached to it. And they delighted in cautionary tales of excess. So as well as Hogarth, many members of the clique admired the work of Sir David Wilkie, who's a well-known Scottish artist. He was a very influential artist in that at the time it was, fashionable to paint subjects of great import. The Royal Academy esteemed artists who painted large-scale historical, mythological, biblical subjects, whereas Wilkie painted ordinary people and on a large scale. And this was something which really inspired the members of the clique. So you can see an example by John Phillip here, a Scotch fair, where he's attempting to do the same around about, this is 1848. Frith, meanwhile, was more directly influenced by another work by Wilkie. This is called Chelsea Pensioners Receiving the London Gazette Extraordinary of Thursday, 22nd of June, 1815, announcing the Battle of Waterloo. So instead of showing the Battle of Waterloo in full and the kind of various heroes of that battle, it shows everyone relaxing. He himself specialized in what were known as sensation paintings. So these were very large-scale works, again, of ordinary folk. His first one is this one here, which was called Ramsgate Sands. And so it just showed everyday life and people from all walks of society mingling. These would be shown at an art dealer's, and they would charge entry, and you'd come in and you'd spend hours looking at these things. And often they were so popular that they had to kind of hold the crowds back. So he made a real living from that. And this particular work was bought by Queen Victoria. So anyway, the regular meetings of the clique came to an end in July 1842 when Dad was commissioned by this man, Sir Thomas Phillips, to join an expedition to Greece, Turkey, Syria, and Egypt. And he wrote to Frith, this is Dad, wrote to Frith from the steamship Hecate, moored off Jaffa, how many times I have thought over the clique with all its associations of fun and frolic mixed. And this was just before poor Dad descended into what was then termed madness, but he suffered some kind of psychotic episode as a result of spending all his time traveling in the hot sun. He wrote to Frith The excitement of these scenes has been enough to turn the brain of an ordinary weak-minded person like myself, and often I have lain down at night with my imagination so full of wild vagaries that I have really and truly doubted my own sanity. So this story has quite a sad ending, because he returned home, but again suffered a further psychotic episode. And during the course of that, he attacked and murdered his father, and was then arrested and committed to Bethlehem or Bedlam Psychiatric Hospital. Extraordinarily enough, though, for the time, he was allowed to continue to paint, and he produced these incredible, highly detailed paintings. This is called the Fairy Fella's Masterstroke. You could spend hours looking at this painting, and it gives you a sense of how extraordinary his imagination was. But as far as Hospitalfield is concerned, it meant that he was no longer able to kind of communicate on a or write letters to Patrick Allen Fraser, and that's important for what happens next. So while this was all happening to Dad and this dismantling of the clique, Patrick Allen, as he was then, returned to Arbroath, ostensibly to illustrate a new edition of Walter Scott's The Antiquary. This was a project which actually sadly never materialised. But the novel features Jonathan Oldbuck of Monk Barnes, quote, a small property in the neighbourhood of a thriving seaport town on the northeastern coast of Scotland. And it clearly was based on Hospitalfield, which was then the home of the Fraser family. And as a consequence of this trip to Monk Barnes, as it was known in Scott's book, Patrick Allen met and fell in love with Elizabeth Fraser. So she was the daughter of Major John Fraser and Elizabeth Parrott, who was a wealthy heiress. And the couple were married in 1843, and Patrick Allen took on his wife's surname in recognition of her superior wealth, because he came from quite a humble background. His father was a stocking maker. And almost immediately they embarked on a plan to convert and enlarge the house that she lived in. And it was then that he created this vision, these wonderful interiors that Lucy's already shown you. And he employed local craftsmen to design the carvings, the wood carvings in the interior and the stonework on the exterior. And some of the ceiling carvings make reference to the exterior through the flora and fauna which are represented. And also inspired by Arbroath's seaside location. They also include heraldic references to the families, both families, and actually the dogs, which Lucy showed in her talk, were the Talbots, which were supposedly emblems of the Allen family. He also created an observatory in the tower, converted the 18th century barn into an art gallery, as you see here, and constructed a fernery, a painting studio in the grounds for his own use. And apart from the observatory, all these features are still in use today. The following year, his friend John Philip married, just to show you Elizabeth Allen Fraser, a little bit older than when they got married. And you can see some of the leatherwork, this extraordinary leatherwork on the interior of Hospitalfield. So yes, the following year, 1844, Fraser's close friend John Philip married Dad's sister, Maria Elizabeth, and so consolidating what was already quite a close connection. And other members of the group stuck together. For example, William Frith and Thomas Creswick worked together on this painting, The Little Cleaner, Frith painting the figure and Thomas Creswick the landscape background. Fraser too kept in touch, Patrick Allen Fraser kept in touch with Philip, and he supported him by buying examples of his work. And this is the first evidence of Patrick's wonderful philanthropy. And then from the early 1850s, Patrick began to build up a very important collection of paintings and drawings. And of course, he intended to commission works from close friends, but he had a very large circle of friends that he'd kind of made in not only London, but also traveling in France. And so he began with people like Robert Scott Lauder. You can see on the left, Scott Lauder was a really influential artist who actually was an inspiring teacher in his own right and set up his own was director of his own school, the Trustees Academy. and also William Calder Marshall, who Lucy's already mentioned, who sculpted this beautiful portrait bust of Elizabeth Allen Fraser. And then in June 1852, Patrick hatched a plan to commission various members of the clique to paint their portraits as a lasting memento of their friendship. And he wrote to Frith, Philip, Ward, Egg, and O'Neill. And Frith replied almost immediately that he would be very happy to do the best for him. These are from the letters. But added, "You will not be disappointed when I tell you it will be some time before I can execute your commission in consequence of numbers of prior engagements." So he was beginning to already make a name for himself as an artist. Philip too was achieving commercial success with his recent paintings of Spain, and he thanked Patrick for the commission, remarking, "How much our brothers of the brush value your good feeling in this affair," but adding, "It will be some time, I fear, before I shall be able to commence. But when I do, it shall be done well." So Fraser's timing was rather unfortunate because they were all just beginning to succeed professionally. And so there was quite a gap of time until they ended up completing these portraits. Augustus Egg was pursuing a dual career as an artist and an actor. He's a really fascinating character, I have to say. And in 1851, he'd taken on the role of David Fallon, a poet and writer of political pamphlets in Sir Edward Bulwer Lytton's comedy Not So Bad As We Seem, which was first performed at the Haymarket Theatre in London. The play was held as a charity event in aid of the Guild of Literature and Art, and this was established by none other than Charles Dickens, great writer. And the first performance they gave included not only Dickens himself, but also Wilkie Collins, the future author of The Moonstone and The Woman in White, and also the illustrator John Tenniel, who's best known as the illustrator of the Alice in Wonderland books. So Egg himself would eventually paint himself. As you can see, this is the portrait that he produced, and he shows himself as the distressed poet. This is a reference to Hogarth, but it's also a reference to the play itself, because Fallon was this kind of impoverished poet. But it did, as I say, it did take some time because he was busy organising exhibitions. He was also patron of William Holman Hunt. And you can see his influence actually in works like this. This is the work for which Egg is probably best known, Past and Present, very typical kind of Victorian narrative painting with a moral message. And it shows the folly of a woman who has strayed in marriage, and the house of, you can notice the children are playing with a house of cards. The house of cards has collapsed there's an apple on the table, which has been sliced in two. It's as if the poor man has been stabbed in the heart whilst this wicked woman is cast out. Of course, if the man had perpetrated this awful offence, he wouldn't have had the same punishment. And then you see the children on the left-hand side grown up and looking out at the moon, and the same moon, the poor wife is huddled under in a sort of a tunnel with the baby that she's produced as a result of this terrible affair that she's endured, but she's living in a life of poverty. So this is very much the kind of subject matter which Victorians enjoyed. So as I said, in the end, the portrait took quite a long time to complete, and it wasn't until September 1858 that he was able to send it to Fraser, who was delighted. I think Egg was prompted to work on the portrait because Alan Fraser had recently given some money to Dickens's guild. And you can see here some of the correspondence relating to Dickens. He actually sent him a donation of £50, which Dickens was very grateful for. I might need to move on quickly, yes. So just to mention the other portraits that were commissioned. The next one was John Philip himself. He'd made a name for himself in Spain. He'd gone off to Spain for health reasons, and he actually specialised in these lovely paintings of Seville. And this particular work was bought by Queen Victoria, who greatly admired his work. He chose to show himself again in Seville, and his subject is the evil eye. There's always some kind of joke attached to these works. And he wrote to Alan Fraser, I hope you'll enjoy these paintings. He said, "My own, you will surely say, is not like Jock, because time has played great havoc with your old friend. The subject is something I saw in Spain. It's this idea. So you can see the woman in the tent who's warding off the evil eye by making this gesture with her hand." Henry Nelson O'Neill painted something a bit more conventional. It's probably a satire, tended to kind of have a dig at pre-Raphaelite painting in general. Yeah, I'm going to finish. And this is Henry. Okay, thank you. Henry O'Neill, he was best known at the time for this work, Eastward Ho, which is a historical painting. It shows the poor women saying farewell to soldiers who are embarking on their way to battle. Again, Frith delayed even more than anybody else because he was just achieving success with this work, the Derby Day, which was so successful. This is another of these great sensation paintings, which shows various members of society, and was sent. And I could tell you, shows pickpockets, shows members of the rich people, poor people, everyone, all these classes mixing, and it was sent on tour of Australia. So which shows again how ambitious these artists were and how successful they were. So he painted himself. This is the one which is at Hospitalfield. He showed himself walking in Naples one morning when a flower girl came up to him and put a flower in his buttonhole with "about to buy your leave." And then this inspired the final painting. And then the last artist who produced her work was Edward Ward, who was part of that original clique. This is the artist in his studio. He found it quite difficult to decide on a subject, but eventually he chose this to show both his daughters, one as a portrait and the other is actually looking on. So anyway, Patrick himself didn't produce a portrait, but he did publish his book, An Unpopular View of Our Times, which was a really kind of influential text. And in some ways, it was a self-portrait. It has really interesting subjects in it. It's a tricky read, let's say, inspired by writers like Thomas Carlyle. It aspires strongly socialist principles, and it addressed subjects as diverse as slavery, agricultural policy, social injustice, the care of young children, education, and capitalism. And this is one of the maids at Hospitalfield who's stolen a moment to read the book and has become so bored that she's let it drop to the floor and has fallen asleep. So he had, again, always this sense of humour. So I hope that's given you a glimpse of what's, what you can see at Hospitalfield, what's available in the archive. And when it came to actually leaving the house to the people of Arbroath and to the people of Scotland, he really remembered the activities of the Guild, the inspiring efforts of Charles Dickens to support actors. And so he left money, not only for the trust, not only for it to be set up as a school of art, but also to support impoverished artists, writers, and sculptors. Thank you. Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
Devo presentarvi Peter St. John, che mi ha in modo esplicito chiesto di non fare presentazioni, ma solo. Quindi abbiamo il piacere di avere con noi un architetto, Peter St. John, che rappresenta anche, che attualmente insegna alla London Metropolitan University in partnership con Adam Caruso. Lo studio Caruso St. John è molto noto, ha sede a Londra e Zurigo, quindi è stato vincitore dello Sterling Prize, fondatore, e tra i fondatori con gli architetti di Adam Caruso e Peter St. John sono membri della Royal Academy. Ci sono troppe cose da dire, però Peter, lasciami dire le ultime 3 frasi del vostro lavoro come studio, che è molto interessante. Lo studio nutre un forte interesse per l'arte contemporanea e ha collaborato con artisti come Thomas Demand, Damien Hirst e Jeremy Delle. Quindi si tratta di un caso di empatia, di collaborazione tra arte e architettura e che poi si riverbera sul paesaggio in modo straordinario, naturalmente, ma soprattutto con un risultato che a noi ha insegnato molto e continuerà a insegnarci molto su questa collaborazione fra paesaggio e architettura. Grazie Peter, ti lascio la parola.
Thank you, Luigi, and thank you everyone for this wonderful invitation to come and talk to you. And I'm here today from my office with my colleagues, James Hand, Nela Bergmans, and Cassie Tremontani, who are sitting there in the audience. It's very nice to be here with you. And I'm going to talk about the work that we have done at Hospitalfield with Lucy Byatt. And I'm going to start with a few images of the place, which were taken in 2012 when we started working with Lucy in a commission that Lucy organised by the artist photographer Ross McLean, which remind me of our first visit to Hospitalfield in that summer. And this is the front of the house, which you may have understood began with a building in the 13th century. So you have walls at the bottom of the building from 1200, and was considerably expanded in the 16th and 17th and 18th century, and subsequently embellished by Patrick Allen Fraser with these wonderful decorations and elaborations to the upper parts of the building. In other words, the house, which is made with this very beautiful red sandstone that you can see in the cliffs along the coast nearby, is not a singular style. It's not a straightforward statement. It's a building that has evolved over 600 years. And the work that we have done, which I think is very modest really, is always seen as part of a continuing, ongoing process. And the site itself has these beautiful trees around the estate. Here, these beautiful beech trees, and because you're by the sea, there's often a very gentle wind and sometimes not so gentle wind. There are also many sycamores which may or may not have been self-seeded. And then around the house and sheltered by the trees are gardens on different sides of the house for different purposes, formal gardens, and then more working places, all of which are defined by these stone walls. And here you can see Lucy's dog, Isaac, who's always there when you go. And another image from that time showing you the kind of general state of the site, rather dilapidated and underused, let's say, but also very beautiful. And in a way, the site, I think that the challenge as architects has been to preserve the atmosphere of the sort of peaceful paradise that the site is and always has been, but change it carefully in order to make it suitable for more people to see it, to make it more public, while preserving the privacy that the artists need to work there. Here's an image of the edge of the grounds where there's a wall and trees. Here the studios that were built in 1902-01 for painting. and the fields that surround the site and the view of the sea, all of which contribute to the sense of it being rather like an island. Here's a plan showing the house in the center left, surrounded by its gardens and the perimeter of trees and its fields, with the encroaching suburban houses which Lucy referred to, and the sea beyond on the east side. When we started the project, we made this drawing. It was a long drawing that we could roll up and carry on the train and lay it out on the table and get out these little pieces showing where we thought we could introduce little projects which were about accommodating and enabling activity that could be brought to the different gardens around the house. Later on, the model the drawing became mounted on a stiffer baseboard, and there were some trees. And you can see an early version of our plan where we're proposing the cafe in the garden in the foreground, the walled garden on the east side of the house, and also a number of buildings behind the house for accommodation, for studios, for the collection. At that time, the projects were concentrated behind. And then a later and more current version of the plan, where you can see the house in the center, and on the right-hand side, the new garden and the cafe building. At the top of the plan, the collection of studio buildings with the new studio that we've built. And on the left, the U-shaped building is a new accommodation building. And the bottom left, the collection center, which is at the front of the site when you approach the house along the drive. So, as Lucy has referred to, the project necessarily had to be thought of as being realized in stages over time. I have to say, a much longer time than I had imagined when we started working on it. And we have realized the project on the right, working with the landscape designer Nigel Dunnett, and we've realized the studio building renovations at the top, but we have yet to realize the two projects on the left-hand side. And I'm going to just briefly take you through these projects that we have done and are planning to do. This is the cafe and the fernery. We made these models to explain to people our idea, which was to build these glassy buildings into and onto the existing stone walls that we found there. We knew that in the corner of the garden here, there used to be greenhouses where they grew vegetables and their fernery, but there was no evidence of what the fernery itself used to look like. There were just these walls. And this shows the situation of the fernery and the cafe in relation to the house. It sits in the northern corner, so it has this southern aspect over the beautiful new garden by Nigel Dunnett. Here you can see the cafe and the fernery. I feel a little bit embarrassed showing this architecture to all these aficionados of Carlo Scarpa with his beautiful details. Our idea was to build these buildings with the most basic form of let's say, conservatory patent glazing, because it was once a working place. And perhaps it owes something to the beautiful early crystalline work of James Stirling from the 1960s, but it was intended to be a kind of working place, and of course that works with the quite straightforward budgets that are necessarily what we're working with. This is the fernery, where this is a very special kind of building type that you find in very few gardens in Scotland. Buildings built at a time when collectors were really fascinated by ferns from around the world, where they built these grottos and high stone walls that provided the shade and the moisture for the fern collections. And then at high level you have the greenhouse, which we imagined and put back on the walls that we found. And there's a walkway around the upper level where you can look into the crown of the ferns, and you can look out over the garden. There was no documentation about what the fernery looked like other than a tiny little etching which showed this view of the crystalline glazing of the conservatory in relation to the house, and this is something that we have put back. And then you have the cafe in the corner of the wall, where you have this nice view south into the garden. Obviously, this is a glazed building, is not something that will work in this climate here in Treviso, but in the north of Scotland, such a thing enables you to extend the period in which it's comfortable to sit out, and it's a very popular little corner. And then a second part that we've made is this collection of studio buildings, which dated from the 18th, 19th, and beginning of the 20th century, which we restored. And then we built this new studio building at the top, the silver building, within a walled yard. This is a drawing that we made to illustrate our project, which we actually showed at the Royal Academy a few years ago. It's a carefully made drawing to show, where you see this collection of buildings in the yard behind the house with these beautiful beech trees, and the new studio which we have built in the far left corner. The studio, this building on the left, is a new building for artists working in new media. That is, Hospitalfield has these wonderful painting studios, but not all artists need that kind of environment now. So the new studio building is about providing space for artists who work in film, video, in music and sound. So the spaces in the building are very well insulated, warm and quiet, with daylight coming into the room from above rather than to the side. And we made this building in timber. Here you can see, and perhaps I should say, we made it with a cladding of timber shingles, which are stained slightly different shades of silver. It makes the building, I think, look a bit like a bird, really. And here the building is resting its arms on the high wall overlooking the field. You're also looking here at the 1901 studio with its amazing north-facing windows to the two big studio spaces. And a lot of attention was given for this small building as to how it rested against the existing stone walls that we found. Here you can see how the timber shingles come to a stop at the top of the wall, and there's another little roof that sheds the water over the thickness of the sandstone, and this lovely aspect at this point to the sea. So this building is a kind of prototype for further buildings that we're planning to make on the site program. Here you can see the studio and the little space that is made between the new building and the existing studios, which is a very sheltered, sunny, south-facing spot for evening events. And the amazing 1901 painting studios, which we have renovated with insulation and repair. This is the big painting studios, and then this is Patrick Allen Fraser's own studio, which he would have built in the late 19th century, which we restored. And then just to describe the projects that haven't been built yet, this is the new accommodation building, which we hope to build. It's a building that provides 10 new rooms for a larger group of people to stay at the site overnight in this form that is a bit like a kind of cloister, let's say, of rooms around a central garden, which we are again building against a stone wall shown in this model in the foreground that exists. So we made a single opening in the new wall into this new building. Here's the courtyard with a garden designed by Nigel Dunnett, which we very much hope to realize, looking back at the house. And you can see the walkway around the courtyard with the individual entrances to the rooms. Here's the plan. There's 10 double bedrooms with their own bathrooms. And in the bottom right-hand corner, a breakfast room with a fireplace for visitors to sit and talk in the evening, and hopefully a nice cupboard with some bottles of whiskey. And I was remembering in putting together this presentation, these special collaborations which Lucy had organized for us in making the accommodation building. So she commissioned 3 artists, the painter Victoria Morton, the sculptor Nick Evans, and the artist Katie Schwab, and craftsman Simon Worthington. And Victoria Morton is making a blanket, which is following the pattern of this painting. Nick has designed this bedside light, which is cast in bronze, and Katie and Simon are going to make furniture with timber that has been made from trees that were cut down at the site and have been seasoned over the last few years with strapping, which you can see here, designed by Katie. And this is a drawing that we made showing one of the bedrooms with the big window. Each room has a big window looking out onto the site with the blanket on the bed by Victoria Morton, and Nick's bedside light, and the chair that's going to be designed by Katie and Simon. And then finally, this is a couple of images of the project which we expect to realize shortly. This is the new collections building, which you will meet when you come to the site first. We have planning permission for this building. We almost have the money to build this building. You will come into the site down the drive, and the building, as it were, it's like a big barn which separates the car park where you come into the site on the left, and then you come out of the car park into the site. And this big barn contains the archive and study centre for Hospitalfield, as well as a small rooflit gallery. You can see that it's going to be made in the same timber and silver shingles as the new media studio. And here we're standing in front of the house, looking back at the archive building, the collection centre, and in the bottom left, in the wall, perhaps you can see that we've made a doorway through the wall that surrounds the site. This idea of always working with the walls of the site and making buildings within the walls. A doorway which we are going to build out of various pieces of stone that have been collected from the site to make an arch. And you will go in there to be introduced to the collection and the history of Hospitalfield, and know what you're going to see before you walk into the site. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Grazie Peter anche per essere stato così asciutto, conciso, proprio come la tua architettura. Passo la parola a Mel Burton o Melania Burton. Mel. Con una brevissima premessa biografica. Mel Burton è laureata in ecologia, architettura del paesaggio, è stata Research Fellow e Project Manager presso l'Università di Sheffield, con diversi progetti di ricerca multidisciplinari finanziati da Unione Europea e Regno Unito, e ora è Senior University Teacher e insegna architettura del paesaggio presso la Scuola di Architettura del Paesaggio dell'Ateneo. Non è un caso che abbiamo invitato Mel e che Mel provenga da Sheffield, perché la sua testimonianza ci è utile e per questo la ringraziamo, anche perché è un compito abbastanza difficile. Gli abbiamo chiesto di dare una testimonianza perché, come sapete, Nigel Dunnett, che è stato evocato molte volte, sarà evocato ancora moltissime volte, ci ha lasciato da poche settimane. Eravamo stati anche un po' testimoni di una sua evidente difficoltà, ma lui anche in modo generoso ed eroico ci ha comunque aiutato, ha contribuito alla costruzione del libro, lo vedrete poi nelle riprese del documentario, quindi è stato immediatamente disponibile a stare al gioco della ricomposizione di tutti i capitoli che ci danno la possibilità di capire la vita passata e corrente di questo luogo che è Hospitalfield. Quindi Nigel ci parlerà con un contributo dal titolo La natura come guida, perdonami, una specie di lapsus, ma non è casuale. Mel ci parlerà di questo e le ringraziamo con commozione e con grande gratitudine per questo contributo e per essere stata disponibile nel giro di pochi giorni a prendere un aereo ed essere qui con noi. Gli lascio la parola.
Hi. So, made the mistake there of not having my translation going. So hopefully I've been introduced and it's been explained I'm here. I suppose as a representative of Nigel and our school, really just to talk a little bit about him and his approach to teaching in our department. And what I've been interested to sort of find as I've kind of gone through his slides, he used Hospitalfield quite a lot in his teaching and kind of used it to kind of illustrate some of the themes and ideas that kind of run through his teaching and that we worked on together. So here's Nigel in his garden in Sheffield. He was a great lover of the great outdoors and gained great inspiration from kind of being outdoors. And around his area, I live very close in Bradfield, where he kind of lived. So Nigel was designer of the hospital wall garden, and he was professor in our school for, I think, over 30 years. We've been trying to work it out, how long he was there. It was a long time. And he was there's a lot of research there, a lot of teaching, and together with James Hitchmo, kind of developed this kind of Sheffield School of Planting approach, which is underpinned by ecological processes, the aim to kind of develop sort of planting approaches for public spaces in particular, which are sustainable, which bring kind of beauty and joy and kind of, I suppose, this kind of enhanced nature sort of idea. So I worked with Nigel very closely. He was the first person I came to teach with when I joined the university. So my background's in ecology. I'm trained as a landscape architect and kind of worked in public practice for many years. Always had this kind of great, as Nigel, a kind of great love of the outdoors. And, you know, I suppose my kind of practice is rooted in that kind of ecological design, working with nature to bring benefits for both people and wildlife, you know, kind of trying to, bring those benefits. So Nigel was a great inspirer of the students in the school. He was very good at kind of catchphrases. So this is one he used to start our ecological lectures off with: plan and plant for a better world. So, you know, trying to inspire the students to say, actually, you know, we can make a difference through the teachings that we make. You know, we're sort of looking to transform sort of cities into sort of taking away from grey places, but kind of, make green them, use nature-based solutions in those ideas. He taught planting design as well as ecological design with myself. And, you know, Nigel very much had that sort of high impact approach to planting. And you see that coming through in the illustrations that he used. We've been having some discussions about Nigel's photos and perhaps why he felt the need to kind of further enhance nature in his photos with the sort of popping colours there, but that was part of his kind of style and his approach. You know, these images inspired our students, and they, I suppose, very much aimed at making these ideas exciting and interesting and kind of capturing imagination. So he did see art as a sort of nature, as plant is an art form, but again, very much kind of underpinned by those kind of ecological principles. So one of the themes that sort of run very much through our teaching is this idea of nature as the guide. So it's the idea that, we have this wonderful world of nature out there, and if we kind of immerse ourselves in it and we kind of understand it, and we understand those ecological processes, those dynamic processes of change, but also the kind of beauty in that landscape, and the materiality, and looking at the locally occurring plant communities and how they're adapted to place, and sort of learning from that. So sort of seeing nature as that guide through that deep understanding. And we take the students out as much as possible. So we have our favourite places near Sheffield. I don't know if anyone's been there. It's near the Peak District, a beautiful area of countryside. So we get our students out there, they're landscape students, they need to learn to be outside in all weathers, which is a shock to some. But we kind of go out there and, we take our sketchbooks and we sort of observe nature. We're looking at the complexity And also sometimes those limited planting palettes, they're quite subdued sometimes, quite limited in what we see in the kind of the beauty of the kind of changing areas. And very much this idea of sort of landscape signatures. So trying to develop places which are designs which are kind of the place. We're not sort of, it's not like a sort of a clean slate. Places have an inherent value, and how we can sort of work with that. And Nigel used the Hospitalfield, the art garden, the Chelsea garden, to illustrate this approach. So where he's taking inspiration from the east coast of Scotland, kind of near Arbroath, near where Hospitalfield is located, and the dune structures there, and the sort of the drought-tolerant planting that grows in those sandy substrates, the kind of textures. So some of you might have kind of seen the art gives a voice garden there, which he kind of obviously collaborated with many others there. And these kind of the dune structures there are translated into the sculptural features. And reading a little bit about it, he was very keen that the garden itself was a piece of artwork. And I know we've been having some discussions about that quite recently. So rather than just placing sculptural objects in the garden, that the place itself was a piece of art. I think when you kind of look at the photos, and this is one of Nigel's photos, kind of pops with colour here. It perhaps might be a little bit difficult to see, to still see that east coast of Scotland, that landscape in there. But it's there in those dune structures and the tolerant, the plantings that are there. But you've got to remember, these are show gardens. They're there to kind of capture imagination and bring the public in, and perhaps introduce new ideas to the general public and in horticulture. So the aim is really not just to sort of mimic nature and sort of or the place, but it's to kind of, to use that perhaps as a starting point. And I was really pleased to sort of find out that the garden's now been relocated, because Chelsea, if you've ever been, it's short term, it's kind of, it's only there for a few days. But no, the gardens are very much relocated. So this one's been relocated to, I think it's Lady Lone Primary School. I hope I'm getting that right, up in Arbroath. And finding out that that's now actually going to be used as a teaching resource for the school. So that kind of, and a sort of an outdoor education centre. So that kind of continuing sort of engagement with that project. But as I said, it's kind of, the idea here really is not just kind of copying nature. It's not just trying to develop a mini nature reserve in a public place or a school or as a show garden, but it's kind of trying to understand the natural processes. So I think this is really kind of comes through very much in the enhanced meadow approach that Nigel and James very much worked on. So this is a view from, again, near where I live, near where Nigel lived in Bradfield, and the kind of the natural meadows there. So the idea here was that through the careful observation, sort of looking at the ecological process of those kind of dynamic changes within a meadow, the sequences of flowering, the way they're all sort of combined and things change over time. Bringing those ideas through to the sort of what we kind of now see, we call them pictorial meadows, enhanced meadows. They've got lots of different names. You may have seen some of these meadows in Nigel's projects. The Super Bloom project at the Tower of London, that's influenced by kind of his travels in California. The Olympic Park is the kind of famous one. These kind of eye sort of catching, popping sort of, just kind of quite stunning assemblages of sort of flowers, native flowers, non-natives, long extended period flowering periods. So that's the kind of idea. It's sort of building on nature. So it's inspired by nature, but it's designed for people. It's designed there to attract attention, but not forgetting that, these new meadows, they're very ecologically rich. They're designed to have a very, very long flowering period, much more than you would get through sort of using native plants in the UK. So, they're right there from early days, right to very late in the season, providing that sort of insect habitat and nature. But yeah, just a little quote there. Enhanced meadows glasses. Beauty and diversity, wild and wonderful, sparkling jewels. And this one actually is on the Manor Estate, which is a very deprived estate in Sheffield, where he developed a lot of his ideas, working very much with a social enterprise in the area. And they were used here when houses had been demolished. So rather than the residents who were there looking at derelict land, they were kind of experimenting with the meadows to again bring that joy and beauty every day. So I'm not looking at derelict site, I'm looking at kind of something quite exciting. So I was very interested to see there was in Nigel's plans for the site, the enhanced meadow at the Hospitalfield site. And I was also really pleased to see it's quite subtle. It's quite subdued. It has the wild flowers there, and it's got the addition of the bulbs coming through to give that sort of early flowering coming through. But it's not one of these eye-popping kind of competing with the buildings kind of meadows. It blends very well. And I really like this, and I was hoping, hoping perhaps if Nigel continued to perhaps develop more of these ideas, the sort of, kind of perhaps more subtle ideas. Anyway, we all love them. We all love the meadows. So one of the things that, again, I'm kind of coming back to Hospitalfield and Nigel's design for it. One of the kind of challenges we have with an ecological design to approach, and this kind of idea of creative naturalism, is it can be messy. It looks great when it's flowering. We've got all this kind of beauty and sort of interest. But, at the end of the season, we're left with the kind of dead seed heads and the dead grasses. I mean, I love this. I mean, I love this kind of subtlety. But, for perhaps general public, where a lot of these plantings are aimed for, that's messy. That kind of looks a bit of a mess. And, we have that challenge there. We often work with an idea, Jonas, a sort of a researcher, this kind of cues to care. So you're kind of tidying edges and sort of adding the little signs that these places are designed. So, and again, I'm kind of starting to find out, very short notice, a little bit more about his design for the Hospitalfield garden, and reading the extract in the book. And Nigel kind of talks about this. This idea that, these plantings are often very informal. They can be quite overwhelming. And he was relishing the opportunity to kind of work much more with a kind of a structure in the Hospitalfield garden. I understand there was kind of not much documentation about the garden and its history. There were no planting plans or sort of designs from the past, but obviously a long history there. So this is the sort of idea that he could work, that gave him opportunity to work with sort of for angles and we'll see this in the next slide, and the kind of formality. So harking back to the monastic garden and the kind of grid pattern there, and the offset angle, which was mentioned before, which kind of actually lines up with the buildings better. So the idea was in the formal garden, was to sort of have that structure, which references the history of the site, but also kind of contains that exuberant planting, and kind of perhaps again working in a sort of different way to these wild meadows and wild plantings that we're more used to seeing. And then here, so very much thanks to Lucy for sharing some photos earlier. So this is the garden, sort of that part of the garden, the formal garden during setting out. And we saw earlier Nigel and volunteers and others kind of planting this up. So this kind of grid-like pattern and this kind of strong structure there. So again, looking through Nigel's lectures, this is appearing, the Hospitalfield garden, this idea of adding structure alongside those informal plantings kind of appears quite strongly. So he was using it in his lectures about structure in planting. and using the kind of, this main axis here to show, we can have those strong ideas in design, even in the naturalistic design, having that strong frameworks and bold formality, that contrast can be very, very effective. So he's talking about it in that way, and then also the kind of structure within the planting. And, you have the hedges, you have the kind of conifers, giving the rhythm and the structure to the garden, but also then in the sort of the planting there, which is very carefully designed. It often looks very, very wild and sort of a bit chaotic, but it's very carefully designed to kind of give rhythm and structure and the kind of repeating patterns and that kind of internal structure of the planting, and, to kind of great effect and wonderful sort of look about it. So I'm finished. One last slide. So again, Lucy, is this the romantic garden? I forgot to ask. It is. I thought it must be. So this is another part of the garden. I just wanted to kind of end on this image because I absolutely love it. So thank you for sharing it. This is the kind of image that inspires me. I mean, I love nature. I love sort of natural places, but in terms of planting and beauty, this kind of chaos is just so inspirational. And these are the kind of images which Nigel used with his students, which kind of inspired them and, inspired us and inspired perhaps many of you and people around the world. Now, we've got a big job to do. We've got a big loss in the department. We will continue to teach. I teach ecological design. My colleagues teach planting. We've got, I used a phrase yesterday, was when we've got some big boots to fill. Do you know that phrase? But, we will continue teaching. We will continue developing the Sheffield School. We'll continue to take his legacy forward and hopefully inspire students for the future. Hopefully they'll come to work on projects like Hospitalfield and create new designs and take that forward. So thank you. Thank you for letting me share this talk about Nigel. I'm quite emotional.
Solo per dire un grande grazie a Mel Burton per essere stata qui con noi e per averci offerto questo racconto sul lavoro di Nigel Dunnett e sulla scuola di Sheffield. Grazie di cuore. E adesso vi proponiamo una breve pausa di 10 minuti per un caffè, un po' d'aria e poi ci ritroviamo qui fra 10 minuti, 12 al massimo. Grazie. Riprendiamo la seconda parte di questa mattinata molto intensa dedicata a Hospitalfield. Abbiamo altri 3 interventi in programma e quindi invito subito qui accanto a me Rebecca Chesney. Rebecca Chesney è un'artista che in particolare residenziale frequentemente a Hospitalfield proprio nell'ambito dell'orticoltura. Abbiamo conosciuto Rebecca a settembre scorso, quando con Davide e Gambino eravamo a Hospitalfield per questi 5 giorni intensi di riprese e interviste, e l'abbiamo vista al lavoro sul campo, proprio sul campo in senso letterale, sui campi sul giardino e sui campi di Hospitalfield. E una breve presentazione di Rebecca come artista multidisciplinare. Si occupa con il suo lavoro in particolare di politiche del paesaggio, con una grande attenzione anche ai temi dell'economia, alle questioni sociali, alle questioni dei diritti e all'impatto che tutto questo ha sull'ecologia e sulla vita delle persone e delle comunità, naturalmente. Il suo metodo di lavoro ha diverse componenti nel raccogliere informazioni per lavorare poi alle sue ideazioni. Lavora molto con le ricerche d'archivio, banche dati open source, incontra in particolare membri delle comunità locali, documenta la presenza di flora e di fauna attraverso registrazioni audio, video, il disegno come strumento di lavoro, con risultati che poi danno forma a installazioni e interventi, mappe, sculture viventi, sia in piccola che in grande scala. E appunto da qualche anno ha questo contatto molto diretto e molto stretto con Hospitalfield, ma le sue opere, diciamo, hanno partecipato a eventi internazionali d'arte contemporanea in diversi ambiti, e tra l'altro è visiting artist anche allo Yorkshire Sculpture Park e ha ricevuto molti riconoscimenti, tra i quali mi piace ricordare almeno l'Henry Moore Foundation Award. E siamo molto grati a Rebecca Chesney di essere qui con noi. Arriva dalla Biennale di Venezia e le do con piacere la parola per raccontarci il suo lavoro a Hospitalfield e non soltanto. Grazie.
Hi, hello. So thanks for the introduction, but mainly thanks for inviting me here to speak. What a pleasure to talk about my work, but also in the context of Hospitalfield, but also to this sort of lovely international audience. So I'm an artist. I'm based in Preston, which is in North England. And you've had a little introduction as to what I look at. The politics of landscape, which is vast, obviously. But I'm going to just run through a couple of previous projects so that you understand my project at Hospitalfield. So I'll just run through them quite quickly. Oh, wait, on the right one. Is it that? Ah, yes, it is. Okay, so you mentioned I was a visiting artist at Yorkshire Sculpture Park in 2021, but actually I was there also. They approached me in 2009 to work on a project on their whole site. So it's in Yorkshire, it's 500 acres, and it's grassland and old formal gardens that have been run down. There's a lake and woodland, and I proposed to survey the site for bees, for bumblebees and solitary bees, and also set up 2 honeybee hives, because my interest is in the ecologies of landscape, but in a way, how do we know about these things? So I thought if I looked at it for a year, I would get to know the site incredibly well, and ask questions of how they manage the site. So this is me surveying the site in, I think this is 2009. 2010 and sound recording the beehives. So I'm condensing a project that was over a year and a half. So I'm showing it in like 6 slides. So, I spent the year surveying the site and what were the bees species, but also what were they feeding on, that chain of connection. And instead of proposing an exhibition of pictures or photographs or, you know, artworks, I wanted to sort of question what can you do with all this information, and maybe make a difference. So I wanted to create something more active in a way, understanding that some landscapes could be better. They could be more ecologically rich, and Yorkshire Sculpture Park as a sort of overgrazed grassland, as it was at the time, it's slightly better now. What could I do? So I proposed 2 meadows, each. So the 2 top images is my proposal within the landscape of 2 meadows, one of blue flowering species, native flowering species, and one of yellow flowering species, each an acre in size, which is pretty massive. That's, what's that, about 4,000 square meters each, slightly apart from each other. And of course, they're made up of natural elements, but by putting them like this, they become a striking visual impact on the landscape. So you know it's not natural, but it's kind of natural. And that's what I really wanted. And this is us doing a test plot in 2010. Now, unfortunately, because of the management of Yorkshire Sculpture Park, we couldn't do it there, which I thought was kind of interesting and a bit depressing at the time. But of course, that's what my work is about, is like what we're allowed to do with landscape, but what we can do with landscape. And often they're very different. However, I was given the opportunity to plant my meadows in an inner city park in Liverpool. These are in Everton. And I planted them, this picture is about a year in, but we planted them in about 2011 or 12, 2012, I think. And obviously it's a completely different situation. One's kind of in the countryside where you think you can do things with the countryside. And then this one's in an inner city in a park. You can see that they're generally blue and generally yellow. Everybody that knows about growing things, nature will literally not do what you want it to do and have its own ideas. So these are images. The first year there was mainly annuals to provide colour, but then obviously the perennials were coming up at the same time. So this is an image in the 2nd or 3rd year with the view of Everton in the background. And of course, so beforehand it was just grass, which of course is a habitat, might be not a very, not a great habitat, but it is working on these sites. You have to understand it's already a habitat. But by introducing all these different species, of course, the insect count went up incredibly. I was like, as a non-ecologist, but having studied it for just so long, you know it is going to work, but in a way, I'm not sure nature guarantees that. And I was like, well, if we're in an inner city, where do all the insects come from in the first place to colonize this place? But anyway, they came. And so obviously all sorts of insects, not just bees. But of course, my primary aim was to create habitat and forage for pollinators. However, obviously, it then became a site of sort of people visit it, have their wedding photos taken there now. But it became a site of study as well. So there's primary schools sort of surrounding the site, and this is their green space to study. So this is one of the primary schools. And then on the right-hand side, doing sort of bee identification workshops, and Liverpool, John Moores have used it in the past as a site of research, like which pollinators are more attracted to yellow and then others to blue, and what are the differences. This is it more recently. So it turns out that it was only really ever proposed for about 3 years, because we didn't know whether anybody would want to continue with it. These things take an awful lot of management and, of course, finance to manage it. However, the local community got together and they did a lot of fundraising and extended all the wildflower areas with sort of the Kew Grow Wild England Flagship Award. They were awarded that, and they got funding from Eden projects. So, of course, now you can see it's incredibly mixed. That's how it goes. The blue and the yellow stayed for maybe 2 or 3 seasons. They went out of sync, and then introducing all these other species. And, of course, we couldn't keep it like that. That's not really why we did it. So it's been amazing to see it change over the years. It's still there. The community still look after it with the help of Eden Projects North. And yeah, so it's been going this whole time. So I wanted to briefly talk about another project. So this is for Super Slowway. I was artist in residence there for about 4-5 years, and I was looking at a 32-kilometre stretch of the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, going obviously from Leeds to Liverpool. And I'm always looking out for derelict plots of land, and this was along that stretch, and it's a council-run space, but they deliberately decided to neglect it. So you can see it's not a really great place to be. It's surrounded by industrial units, but there is a community very, very nearby that use it to from their houses onto the canal. But obviously, the Will You Marry Me, somebody obviously thought it was a lovely space at some point. A little bit depressing now. I wonder what happened. Anyway, so I was given permission, not by the council. I don't think we ever got permission from the council. We fundraised, and so I proposed we couldn't transform the whole park. It's not that big. On that top left-hand image, you can see the canal on the left-hand side, and actually the road is on the right-hand side. It's literally the width of that building, and I'm stood at one end. However, obviously changing these spaces can take an awful lot of time and effort. I used species that I'd already noted along the canal, and with the help of the local school, getting them to do all the horrible jobs, we transformed the space. But again, there was already a habitat there, although it was full of rubbish, and like people have been dumping there. There's still things living there. So in a way, we were expanding that a bit and taking that into consideration. And it's now become a place where people can linger more, use it. We weren't allowed to do anything like structural, so we did just renovate the benches and clear some of the weeds around the benches. I quite like leaving a few. So it's become a sort of more, I suppose, a pleasant place to linger, as well as providing habitat. So, to Hospitalfield. I've run through 2 projects just so that you see what I look at. So it says 24 to 26, but actually my first visit was in 2016. And I was invited by an artist called Labena Himid, who was doing an exhibition at Hospitalfield, and she's now representing Great Britain at the Venice Biennale. So really nice connection there. And that was my first time visiting Hospitalfield. And again, I was looking at all the species found around the site. So I was looking at all the insects and wild flowers. I'm not really a gardener, so I'm not especially interested in garden species. I think they're very nice, but I'm not especially bothered. So again, I was kind of looking at all the species, making drawings. I do sound recordings, collecting specimens, and just getting to know a site, what's already there, who's using it, not just the public, but also wildlife. How could it be better? And it was during a conversation with the gardener there, Carly Wotton, that so I joined like the garden club just so that I could chat to all the volunteer gardeners, but also have those conversations about the garden and who uses it and why and the history of it. And it was one of those conversations with Carly Wotton that said there's a quite scarce butterfly on the east coast of Scotland called the small blue butterfly, which is it's the little one in the middle. It's labelled underneath it. Obviously lost a bit of its colour. It's not as blue as it would suggest, but so it's very scarce, but it is very close to along the coast, right near to Arbroath. But it solely relies on one plant, the kidney veg. And I kind of thought that this was interesting that one species relies on the other. Now, kidney veg isn't especially rare, but it's quite fickle. And although it's a perennial, it doesn't then live forever and ever and ever. It's a moving species almost, because it likes sand dunes and cliffs. And of course, with the increase of coastal erosion, any threats to kidney veg have a direct effect on the scarce blue butterfly. So I thought, okay, what could we do? Now, there is a lot of initiatives along the coast. Conservation charities are already doing work along there. So I'm not especially discovering anything, but I just wondered, how could Hospitalfield become that link between maybe the public and growers and this small blue butterfly? So I proposed to grow one patch of the walled garden entirely with kidney veg. So this is it at the beginning of the season of last year, obviously the bare patch. And then this is it by the end of that season. Of course, it wasn't going to flower in the first season. It's going to flower this season. And I've also wanted to sort of spread the word about the project. I've asked for volunteer growers in the region to take a kidney veg plant it in their garden or in a window box, observe it and nurture it, and collect the seeds. Depending on where they're living, these volunteer growers, if they live on the coast, they might get a small blue butterfly. But literally the rest of us, and Hospitalfield included, might never get a small blue butterfly on the plant because it is a very coastal thing. However, by collecting these seeds, we can then distribute them to the local golf course, the local school. We can give them to the conservation charities. And so it's connecting growers and the community via this funny little plant to this butterfly that we might not see. So in a way, it's there's a lot of faith given by everybody and trust that this will become, every little seed then becomes important, and we are doing something, we're doing something. So everybody gets a kit. I hand screen printed some books, and the kit is little. You get a plant and a book and a way to collect the seeds. The plants are being given out at the end of this month, and obviously everything will flower this summer. And some plants might fail. Some plants might not like the garden they're put in, but in a way that becomes part of the project. I want to document all of it. Yeah. So that is my kidney vetch project, and it's continuing. We will collect the seeds at the end of this season and give them out. And of course, depending on, I don't know whether you've noticed, but I've scattered kidney vetch literally all over the site, up and down the drive, in the bits. You've been pulling it out, yeah, around the entrance sign and everything. Anyway, so that's the kidney vetch project. But at the same time, how long have I got? Another 5 minutes, maybe? Okay, so at the same time, last spring, there's a funny L-shaped plot of land at the edge of Hospitalfield. So on the left-hand image, obviously you can see my red L shape, but the arable fields are Hospitalfield. And then you can see Hospitalfield in the green tree area. But you can also see that that L is that sort of barrier almost, or link maybe, between the housings, you know, the local housing and then the Hospitalfield site. And I think traditionally it was grazed. It's been mentioned that ponies were on there, was it? Ponies or goats? Something like that. Anyway, I think it sort of, COVID didn't help with the management of it, and it sort of become like just an overgrown area. And I was like, well, how could we make it better? Of course, again, it is already a habitat, no matter how messy it is. But of course, the neighbours mentioned that, and also it's like, well, okay, what can we work with? How can we make it better? But it is pretty massive. So funds were raised and work started, and we worked with women's groups from the area and then family groups as well, and groups that were already coming to Hospitalfield. And they dug up brambles and took out some of the more invasive species, but then replaced them with large patches of wildflowers. But of course, it's such a massive area, we couldn't possibly cover it all in flowers, and maybe that's not what we wanted anyway. So we've planted lots of shrubs and very small trees, but also during that, the people that are working on it are learning to work in a group. They're doing safe tool handling, they're learning about their management, but they're also working outside, which of course is such a joy to have that opportunity. Some people never get that chance. And this is summer last year. So of course it's mainly annuals coming up. There's a few perennials coming up in these pictures. You can see that we've left great ribbons of the grasses because of course they do create habitat and movement. And yeah, I don't know, just make it how it should be. And this is looking back over the arable fields, back over to the studios. The L shape is kind of a dead end. It is so we've created this sort of circular walk, and if you know it's there, it's so lots of locals use it. Of course, lots of the houses back onto it, and they seem pretty happy with it. They helped with watering it during the dry season. They donated plants. So in a way, this is a long-term project. With any landscape, you have to have that long-term vision. It will change every single year. Things will grow up, things will die. The things that we think have liked it will probably like it for a while and then not like it afterwards. So in a way, it's one of those projects that will be shaped by lots of different things for time to come, to do with Hospitalfield. And I think that's me.
Grazie molte a Rebecca per questo racconto sul suo lavoro e sul lavoro fatto ad Hospitalfield, che tra l'altro ci ha dato modo anche di mettere a fuoco anche tutto il rapporto con il mondo anche del volontariato attivo ad Hospitalfield. E mi piace anche citare la giardiniera di comunità Carley Burton, a cui ha fatto cenno Rebecca, che è stata una figura che dopo la realizzazione e l'apertura al pubblico del nuovo giardino progettato da Nigel Dunnett è quella che un po' ha, come dire, messo insieme i gruppi dei volontari per la cura quotidiana del giardino stesso, anche in relazione appunto ad artisti come Rebecca Chesney e altre figure lì. Carley Burton la conoscerete brevemente attraverso il documentario di oggi pomeriggio. E ora mi piace invitare qui accanto a me Thilo Folkerts, che fa parte del nostro comitato scientifico da diversi anni, che ha partecipato al gruppo di esploratori, viaggiatori, delegazione del comitato a maggio di un anno fa, e che quindi ha visitato insieme al gruppo Hospitalfield, e a cui abbiamo chiesto di portare una sua visione di questo luogo grazie alla visita fatta all'epoca e agli approfondimenti successivi. E di Thilo Folkerts, proprio poche parole per presentarlo: ha studiato architettura del paesaggio al Politecnico di Berlino, insegnato al Politecnico di Zurigo, all'Università di Montréal, all'Accademia delle Arti di Stoccarda. Da 2 anni insegna progettazione architettonica all'Accademia delle Arti di Vienna. Però Thilo Folkerts è soprattutto un architetto paesaggista progettista con studio a Berlino, 100 Landschaft Architecture, il nome dello studio, fondato a Berlino nel 2007, e con molta esperienza in ambito di progetti sia in Germania ma anche in Francia, Svizzera, Italia, Belgio, Canada, e collabora con noi da diversi anni, e dal 2020 è membro del comitato scientifico. Gli lascio la parola. Molteplicità, una visita a Hospitalfield è il titolo che ha voluto dare al suo intervento sia nel libro che alla mattinata di oggi. Grazie.
Perdona, utilizzo questo contesto anglosassono di fare la mia presentazione in inglese, se mi lasciate. Rebecca, I don't know, you probably didn't notice because you were looking this way, but while you were presenting your wonderful meadows, there was a fly going across the projection, so you actually had a proper insect going over your fields. I have 15 minutes, I think. It's very short. I would like to offer some observations and speculations that are shamelessly founded on really only initial knowledge of Hospitalfield, because I've not been there for a year. And that was only the first time anyways to do that. For me, Hospitalfield is a dazzling collage of architectural volumes and gestures of everything, but it starts with the facade here, and we've seen this quite so many times. But to me, maybe in the conception of Alan Fraser already, there's this immense multiplicity of things that come together. Obviously, this multiplicity counts for the larger ensemble of everything that Hospitalfield is, and I would say it's a place of concentrated openness. Similar to the facade of the main building, the walled garden is partitioned. It's divided, it's split, it's fragmented into 3 separate spaces by internal walls and hedges. The walls have a historic continuity over hundreds of years, and then there is also the monastic history of almost 1,000 years. And the current iteration of this garden by Nigel Dunnett, together with Caruso St. John, is reconfigured in its geometric layout. It references this monastic history, but it also creates a plant structure with different planting themes, different arrangements, and each of these individual geometries follows a well-conceived artistic arrangement of plant textures and colors. And we've seen very many of them. In the middle segment, there is, however, something much more simple, something much more open, a slightly larger area with a small orchard cultivated as a species-rich and flower-rich meadow patch. Hedges create another series of smaller cabinet-like garden chambers, and some of these chambers are used for cultivating kitchen herbs, the vetch that you are cultivating, and vegetables, composting, and garden experiments. In the middle segment, a slightly larger area with got confused here. So compartmentalization, the creation of many multiple situations, plays a socially constitutive and structural role at Hospitalfield. The contemporary architectural interventions that play their part in this structuration by Caruso St. John are part of a whole ensemble, as I mentioned before. The new garden cafe, the reconstructed fernery, the historic studio houses with a newly added volume. And Peter St. John already showed this image in a colorful way. These different interventions by the architects reveal themselves casually as a matter of course, and yet they work strongly as mediators of a complex spatial ensemble. Obviously, in a narrower sense, there is a finely tuned and composed relationship of interior and exterior in between the individual parts of the architectural ensemble. And again, Peter St. John showed us in the models how well and precisely this is done. But beyond that, there is an integrally intertwined relationship between the buildings and the garden. In the ferry, the walls themselves are part of the mise en scène. At the same time, they create the habitat conditions for the ferns. And beyond my discovery of fernery as a building typology, this is such an interesting moment of immediate reaction between plants and architecture, between gardening and architecture again. So constant interchanges between inside and outside, starting with the wall of the garden itself, in the almost fragmented and folded facades of the main buildings that I showed in the beginning. This repeats itself in the sequence of the wall garden spaces and the repetitive geometries that fractalize down to the checkered planting beds inside. And I would like to challenge the architects to the thought that their way of doing things in this context of Hospitalfield is actually a gardener's approach to building something. You can later agree with me on that or not, but I would like to put it out as a challenge. The multiplicity of the formal garden allows for diversity, for learning and participation. It constitutes a controlled, open system. The garden, designed by Nigel Dunnett and with the help of Edward Payne, left, and this is from Nigel Dunnett, it left pockets empty to be developed by artists and garden volunteers, imparting a loss of control, an opening of unforeseen outcome and community. Supported and embedded by Nigel Dunnett's naturalistic planting design, the open chambers seem to serve as a synapsis in a dynamic and sprawling art and social network. Nigel Dunnett presented the Hospitalfield Arts Garden as his contribution to the Royal Horticultural Society's Chelsea Flower Show, and you pointed out that there is a quite different role of a garden in such a show, garden show, and a show garden is something else than maybe another kind of garden. But I'm very intrigued by the narrative of a garden that is represented by a garden. The garden project of Arbroath is being brought to Chelsea and translated to a flower show garden, bringing a representation of a Scottish site and a Scottish garden to London, and kind of bringing it back because he started his artistic, Patrick Allen Fraser started his artistic education in London, and then he kind of it's being brought back to London now physically as a showcasing of a commendable art project. This transposition underlines the possibility of a catalytic cultural role of garden. And this is another challenge, and I would like to put this out to all of us working in the business of gardens. The cultural role of a garden in a larger societal context. You, Mel, you talked about the enhanced nature. I really very much like this term. But horticulture is also a mediator, and this is exactly what I'm interested in as the Garden of Hospitalfield taking up a role in a larger cultural context. And I'm reading the British context where the garden, the horticulture has such an immense central role in daily culture. If you open the newspaper or any magazine, there will be lots of things about gardenings, and everyone in Great Britain is a gardener, I guess, or at least will try to be, or will have words to defend him or herself why he or she is not. So it plays really an immense central role. The plantsman and horticulturalist in this context becomes an ambassador of the arts when we look at Hospitalfield. And it is noteworthy how the presentation and representation of a garden aims to anchor Hospitalfield arts and cultural institution within a larger audience, which is the national scope, I would say. And generally, this role as a mediator is an overlooked role of the garden. In 1997, I started my career with doing a temporary garden in the historic center of Berlin, and this kind of search for giving the garden a new role was then continued in 2010 when I was invited to do a temporary garden with the Rayford Gardens in Grand Métis in Canada. And at that time, there was a fantastic person curating this show, Leslie Johnston, who took her chance to make a catalog of this place in Grand Métis and reflected about the power and the possibilities of temporary gardens. She quotes Tim Richardson on explaining the approachable and open quality of the gardens because, quote, gardens are places conceived to be used. Because they are outside and thus subject to the variables of weather and nature, and because they implicate visitors' bodies as well as their minds, gardens offer particularly intense aesthetic experiences. And yet, this engagement is somehow effortless. Leslie Johnston then adds another author, the French philosopher Anne Coquelin, who observed on the ordinary garden that, unlike much of contemporary art, gardens are easily approachable. They are artlessly familiar, they are directly perceivable, and through their good nature, which is kind of a pun here, through their good nature, they reconcile the public with contemporary art forms. Garden and horticulture garden and horticulture pose a low threshold towards artistic and creative activity. And here again, the role of the garden might quite naturally be used as a mediator between audience and art. And I'd like to go back to the prize that we gave 4 years ago to the Naturpark Schöneberger Südgelände, where we observed that art, and with the sculptures of the Odious Sculpture Group, actually worked as mediators to explain about nature and urban ecology. And in a very interesting way, the sculpture actually helps to understand nature. Whereas here in Hospitalfield, maybe it's the other way around. Nature and horticulture maybe helps to give access to artistic practice. The day that we visited Hospitalfield, and I'm a little bit behind here. The day we visited Hospitalfield, there were very few people working. We met a garden worker, 2 people were busy in the garden cafe when we arrived, and I agree it's a very pleasant place to be. We were immediately given coffee and took some rest and had some warm sunlight through the glass. When we arrived there was a small video and media production going on in one of the studio spaces, and we couldn't disturb there. But the tools in the studios, the common dining table in the kitchen that looked as if it had only been left briefly, this gathering place reflected the obviously committed and communicative presence of many players and contributors. And also in this social sense, the garden takes up a role as a connector. And perhaps this is one of the most interesting things that we can learn from Hospitalfield. And I do want to finish with a reference to someone who has probably died way too early, because he seemed to have been a connector between very different ideas of gardening and dealing with nature and gardens. Thank you.
Grazie a Thilo Folker. E adesso arriviamo, diciamo, all'ultimo intervento della mattinata, poi forse ci sarà anche spazio eventualmente per qualche domanda o qualche riflessione. E mi piace invitare qui Davide Gambino, regista e produttore cinematografico che collabora con noi dal 2015, il primo film documentario realizzato per, diciamo, il premio Carlo Scarpa è stato quello dedicato a Mare Dolce la Favara a Palermo nel 2015, e da allora non abbiamo più lasciato Davide Gambino, che naturalmente però oltre al lavoro che fa per raccontare i luoghi premiati con il linguaggio del film documentario, ha poi una sua vita professionale come produttore da film, come regista di diverse serie, docufilm, citiamo Il bar del Cassarà, ma citiamo Pietra Pesante, uno dei suoi lavori di esordio, che ha ricevuto anche diversi premi internazionali, e un luogo tra l'altro che continua ad attrarlo, e il film The Second Life, che è stato presentato anche qui in questo luogo qualche anno fa, documentario pluripremiato anche questo, una serie dedicata alla guerra nell'antimafia, Vendetta, serie documentaria prodotta per Netflix, che ha avuto una circolazione in centinaia di paesi. E vabbè, non dico altro sul lavoro di Davide, con il quale appunto abbiamo passato una settimana stretta di lavoro intenso a settembre dell'anno scorso a Hospitalfield, insieme a Lucy che ci ha supportato continuamente in questo lavoro naturalmente. E abbiamo chiesto a Davide di raccontare appunto un po' il suo lavoro per realizzare questa piccola produzione cinematografica come Premio Carlo Scarpa insieme a noi, dal punto di vista appunto della sua visione di regista di film documentari e del suo rapporto con i luoghi in cui lo costringiamo a viaggiare insieme a noi. Grazie Davide.
Grazie mille Patrizia e grazie mille per questa alla Fondazione Benetton di Ricerche ovviamente e anche a Hospitalfield per l'accoglienza durante le giornate di riprese. Io sono molto felice di questa rinnovata occasione qui in Fondazione, la collaborazione appunto decennale e che non è casuale, cioè in qualche modo è del tutto naturale, trovo. E mi piace citare, riflettevo guardando il documentario, quello che dice Peter St. John riferendosi alla sua collaborazione con Hospitalfield, dicendo che this long-term relationship with Hospitalfield is very unique for an architect. E in qualche modo, ecco, per me è davvero unica la collaborazione con la Fondazione Benetton in questi anni. Appunto, come diceva Patrizia, con la mia piccola società di produzione cerco di sviluppare delle storie originali e invece con la Fondazione, nel contesto di un progetto altrettanto originale come il Premio Carlo Scarpa, in qualche modo si è creata questa sorta di concept che si rinnova. Quindi una sfida interessante attraverso i luoghi. In questo brevissimo intervento cercherò di essere più conciso e veloce possibile. Diciamo, sorvolerò il processo articolato, complesso, di racconto di luoghi. Questi sono, diciamo, i luoghi attraversati nel contesto del Premio Carlo Scarpa e in qualche modo la sfida è appassionante perché appunto i luoghi in qualche modo stanno in una dimensione che è quella della complessità del ragionamento sul paesaggio e però non parlano. E invece il cinema in qualche modo è una sfida comunicativa e quindi in questo incontro, in questa sorta di caccia si articola appunto il desiderio di riverberare la complessità dei luoghi, ma allo stesso tempo cercare di avere un impatto comunicativo più largo possibile. Quindi attraverso un dispositivo, se volete, di finzione, adesso vi racconterò brevemente come il cinema documentario sia un linguaggio assolutamente pertinente dal mio punto di vista per ragionare su luoghi e paesaggio. Quindi attraverso un dispositivo di finzione, perché il documentario racconta la realtà, ma alla fine è una costruzione, cercherò brevemente di decostruire questo lavoro che si nutre di una dimensione appunto interdisciplinare e multidisciplinare, esattamente come la missione del comitato scientifico della Fondazione Benetton. Quindi cinema di documentario con una pratica di ascolto e di relazione. Come vi dicevo prima, i luoghi non parlano, però chi lo abita e chi lo ha abitato in qualche modo continua a raccontare i luoghi. Non si tratta di documentare, di registrare analiticamente la realtà, ma costruire relazioni, sguardi, diciamo, e racconto. E in questa patchwork, scusate la confusione, diciamo, la ricchezza visiva, però in qualche modo riflette un po' il lavoro multidisciplinare. Una prima fase, mi piace per chi mi conosce in qualche modo, sa che per cercare di condensare questo processo ve lo strutturo molto rapidamente in 3 fasi, in 3 scritture se volete, in 3 movimenti. Una prima che è in questo processo di decostruzione, il primo incontro con il luogo, scelto nel contesto del Premio Carlo Scarpa. E per procedere in questa decostruzione è necessaria una fase di ricerca preliminare sul contesto storico, geografico, culturale, insomma un primo livello di avvicinamento che è particolarmente complesso. Nel caso di Hospitalfield lo è stato in modo appassionante e particolare, ed è un lavoro estremamente concreto, un po' se volete è un po' come dissodare un terreno per iniziare a coltivarlo, a prendersene cura, e quindi c'è un lavoro appunto su una dimensione cronologica, quindi storica, ovviamente, però anche poi su un lavoro legato al presente, perché il documentario deve registrare e raccontare poi una realtà nel suo svolgersi. Molto rapidamente, non mi dilungo sulla stratificazione di un luogo come Hospitalfield. Ne hanno parlato in modo molto più degno di me chi mi ha preceduto da un punto di vista sia storico-artistico, sia la ricchezza di fonti, perché il paesaggio in qualche modo appunto è anche un ragionamento sulle fonti che lo hanno costruito. E in questo caso all'Hospitalfield un ragionamento sulla storia dell'arte, ma anche sulle mappe. Vedrete nel documentario oggi come ci sia appunto un lavoro dei volontari nel collezionare documentazione, mappe, un qualcosa che ha le sue risonanze anche col lavoro che si fa qui, e quindi era particolarmente interessante creare insomma questo dialogo. L'attraversamento, avete visto, di autori come Walter Scott, così importanti per la cultura scozzese, e anche il lavoro contemporaneo. Quindi tutto questo studio documentale di ricerca e di sviluppo si nutre di questo lavoro multidisciplinare, ma poi soprattutto ovviamente c'è una messa in relazione con i protagonisti, i guardiani del luogo. E quindi c'è una fase in cui voglio ringraziare ulteriormente la Fondazione, ovviamente il Comitato Scientifico, in particolare Patrizia, Boschiero e Luigi Latini, in qualche modo mi accompagnano in questo processo di decostruzione e di ricerca, e c'è una messa in relazione con le persone che poi diventeranno protagonisti, personaggi del documentario. E quindi c'è una fase di ricerca anche appunto dei profili e dei professionisti che verranno coinvolti, studiandone appunto la dimensione anche professionale. E in questo anche un utilizzo dei materiali, diciamo delle produzioni e dell'archivio che i protagonisti possono in qualche modo fornire. Alla fine di questa fase di sviluppo, Patrizia, Boschiero e Luigi Latini sono abituati, insomma io li contatto per una sorta di restituzione di questa prima fase progettuale. C'è un termine mutuato dal baseball che è pitch, che in qualche modo è una sorta di conclusione della prima fase di scrittura, in cui molto brevemente, in chiave molto sintetica, cerco di fare immaginare quello che sarà il film, dopo questa prima fase, come dire, di analisi e di scrittura. Ovviamente, una volta validata la proposta, si entra in una fase, cioè un'altra parola chiave in qualche modo è reciprocità. In questa fase in cui appunto tutta la fase di ricerca e sviluppo viene ultimata, io stesso, mentre lo racconto, io stesso e alcuni miei collaboratori, in qualche modo ci convinciamo della forza e della fattibilità della proposta. E quindi in questa fase poi successivamente si entra in una fase di produzione, che è una seconda scrittura. E nel caso di Hospitalfield è stata un'esperienza, come lo è sempre stata, estremamente potente, perché nella fase di avvicinamento al luogo, nella fase in cui se ne sente il respiro, il ritmo, è lì che in qualche modo le idee che sono state immaginate in una prima fase vengono messe in crisi a volte e in altro modo magari sviluppate. E in questo caso, per esempio, c'è una fase un po' più concreta, se volete, la fase di produzione, cerchiamo che facciamo in modo che sia più contingentata possibile, perché è una fase tecnica complessa, non entro in dettagli per non annoiare, però nel caso di Hospitalfield si è creato, questo ve l'anticipo, oggi vedrete, per chi avrà modo, vedrete il documentario, c'è stata una riflessione, come dire, visivo-narrativa, e questo oggetto che vedete in alto a destra, questo mirror box, in qualche modo era legata, lo vedrete oggi, i personaggi del documentario guardano in camera, che è un qualcosa che non si fa mai al cinema, è un qualcosa che rompe, diciamo, la sospensione della credulità dello spettatore, un qualcosa che, diciamo, grammaticamente non si fa. Ecco, nella visione e nei sopralluoghi operati a Hospitalfield, questa dimensione di soglie costanti che vedrete nel film, e anche il fatto che ci fosse un'ambiguità, walled garden, un luogo chiuso, un luogo insulare, diceva Peter St. John prima, e allo stesso tempo un luogo dell'accoglienza, ecco. Cercare di rompere questa quarta parete tra il personaggio e il pubblico, in qualche modo, è qualcosa che questo apparato ottico mirror box ci ha permesso, per cui chi guarda in camera vede il riflesso, il mio sguardo di chi intervista, ma in realtà sta guardando dritto in camera, come se guardasse lo spettatore. Comunque avrete modo poi di vedere successivamente. Poi c'è una particolare contingenza che è quella della collaborazione con troupe locali, quindi il luogo e la produzione, la fase di produzione in qualche modo viene sviluppata con dei professionisti locali. In questo caso li ringrazio con l'occasione Richard Patterson, sound designer scozzese, Julian Schwanitz, che vedete qui festeggia BAFTA winner, cinematographer scozzese, e quindi questo è interessante perché ovviamente si crea un'atmosfera di autenticità ulteriore, è lì che nascono in questa fase di produzione diciamo un intenso lavoro, una dimensione profonda che sonda il luogo nella sua complessità. Poi allo stesso tempo il luogo nella sua complessità, visto che una narrazione va costruita, è fondamentale che ci sia una varietà scenografica e contenutistica, ma che allo stesso tempo sia pertinente con il racconto. Quindi c'è un'esplorazione che va oltre, diciamo, il contesto puramente specifico del luogo, ma che con il luogo è molto correlato. Vedete dei luoghi chiave che girano intorno a Hospitalfield. Dopo questa seconda fase, diciamo, di scrittura estremamente aperta, ne segue un'altra ulteriore, che invece è una fase estremamente più intima, quindi è come una sorta di respiro quasi, di un polmone che si apre e poi in qualche modo in questa fase di montaggio e post-produzione, è una fase puramente tecnica, ma non solo, anche molto, come dire, è una fase in cui vengono riverificate le due fasi precedenti. C'è una messa in relazione profonda con il luogo, in cui la fase di produzione ha informato quest'ulteriore fase che diventa un'ulteriore scrittura. E quindi in questa fase avviene una fase avviene come dire, una costruzione visiva che si estende al di fuori diciamo del software di montaggio e che permette di costruire una narrazione con dei ritmi che possano in qualche modo rappresentare e tradurre la complessità del luogo da una parte, ma allo stesso tempo la dimensione narrativa. Quindi c'è continuamente questa sorta di scontro e di conflitto tra un lavoro filologico, scientifico, che in qualche modo sia pertinente rispetto al lavoro del comitato scientifico, ma allo stesso tempo cercare di allargare un audience al di fuori di un pubblico puramente specialistico. Fase di post-produzione, che è una fase di crisi, però anche estremamente dinamica ed interattiva, e poi un ulteriore step progettuale che è quello della color correction, del sound mix, che sono altrettanto importanti perché permettono in qualche modo di scrivere in una certa profondità il racconto, e poi una collaborazione anche estremamente, come dire, con una dimensione appunto di complessità, che è quella del lavoro sulle musiche, che le musiche vengono trattate come dei personaggi a tutti gli effetti, quindi c'è proprio una sorta di scrittura, sia nella prima fase di preproduzione. E con l'occasione voglio ringraziare i musicisti con cui collaboro anche lì da quasi una decade, quindi diciamo non è casuale. E qui abbiamo Gianluca Bartolo, che con l'occasione ringrazio, che insieme a Pino Petraccia ha scritto le musiche cercando di interpretare nel suo svolgersi, perché appunto le idee si evolvono, ma un processo di relazione altrettanto, diciamo, articolato. Queste 3 fasi di scrittura, diciamo, sono processi appunto della stessa ricetta metodologica, se volete, di costruzione di un documentario. E uso un termine culinario perché lo vedrete anche oggi, non è stato citato negli interventi precedenti, ma lo chef di Hospitalfield, Ugo Abis, è uno dei protagonisti, lo vedrete, ha in qualche modo, articola anche lì diciamo, un supporto e un lavoro creativo a supporto appunto dell'attività artistica che si svolge ad Hospitalfield. E dopo queste prime 3 fasi di scrittura ovviamente poi si arriva a una lettura del film documentario, che in qualche modo, dico sempre, poi appartiene a chi lo guarda, alla fondazione in primis ovviamente, ma che l'ha commissionato, ma anche al pubblico a cui il film poi in qualche modo appartiene. Ecco. Visto che preferisco esprimermi per immagini piuttosto che a parole, vi lancio e mostro il trailer di Hospitalfield. Grazie.
Hospitalfield makes people believe that they can drive their poor loved one who's just had a broken arm and have it bandaged here. And of course, that's not the case. The period of the hospital was the 12th century, at a time when the abbey was at its most busy, popular. Pilgrims were coming from all over Europe.
When you come to Hospitalfield, and it's like visiting an island, and when you come here you think this is a place in which interesting things could happen.
800 years is a very long time in anything, but in terms of garden, it's a real challenge to think about. Patrick Allen Fraser was from Arbroath. He was a local man. He had trained as an artist. In 1842, an Edinburgh publisher who published the novels of Sir Walter Scott contacted Patrick and asked him if he would provide illustrations for the antiquary.
But Patrick built his masterpiece, the picture gallery where we're standing now. He's got pictures of his friends all around the walls. This picture gallery it's a bit like Patrick's Facebook page.
So you got some lovely flowers and herb tea and mint soup.
And even nowadays, people still come. It's not a museum as such. It's a very kind of living place, and the artists are still here.
You know, creating the heritage of the future, if you like.
Vi ringrazio ulteriormente, spero di vedervi più tardi alla proiezione. Grazie.
Grazie a tutti, ci vediamo per chi può venire alle 17 alla Chiesa Sant'Eonisto per la cerimonia del premio. A più tardi.